Yes, effectively, yeah. It is a very rare occasion. It has happened before. Uh, I saw that. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. They get to show up if they want to.
Hello. Yay, it worked. So good afternoon. We've got you here for an hour. We've been reasonably okay at finishing on time. So let me introduce myself. I am Charlotte Stevens. I founded Charlotte Stevens Consulting about 3 years ago at the end of 2021 when I retired, yay, from the practice of law. I spent about close to 40 years as a labor and employment attorney, primarily working in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, but also did some work throughout New England, Vermont, Maine, Connecticut, none in Rhode Island that I can think of, but pretty much everywhere else. And like I said, retired at the end of 2021 and started my part-time retirement gig doing training, doing investigations, mediation, conflict resolution, and some strategic human resources consulting. I'm going to let my colleague here, Samantha, introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam O'Neill. I've been in human resources for about 30 years in corporate, working in different industries, healthcare, manufacturing, IT. And I decided I was going to make a change, and I opened Forge Point Solution Group in May. So I'm in month 9 of my own HR consulting company, and partner with Charla on quite a few things. I also do investigations, leadership development training, one-on-one coaching, and I also provide HR support for small to mid-sized companies who don't have an HR department.
So welcome. We're really happy to be here. And you are session number 4 today. So if we're starting to peter out a little bit, we might need you to chime in and speak more. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a roadmap of where we are going today. As the title slide says, diversity, equity, and inclusion, where do we begin? So our goal is that this is the beginning, not the end of a conversation. So we're going to discuss some basics like definitions, because I think people have very different perspectives on what it all means and what it's intended to be. We are going to talk about discrimination and anti-discrimination laws. I know that you just had anti-harassment training, so this is a little bit different from that. Hopefully clarify any misperceptions that might be out there about discrimination, equity, and inclusion. We will have some hypothetical scenarios, so we definitely need your participation there, but you are welcome to interrupt us with questions or challenge us if you would like on any points. That's why we have these conversations, not for us to just stand up here and tell you stuff from our perspective, but to hear your perspective as well. And then we're going to talk a little bit about your role in ensuring a welcoming community for those who come here to do the state's business, whether it is fellow legislators, whether it's employees or members of the public. So definitions is where we're going to start. Diversity. So when we talk about things like DEI initiatives, we always want to make sure that we're on the same page as to what we're talking about when we're talking about diversity, because it can have many different meanings. Psychological, physical, social differences for sure, occurring among individuals. And here, this is a definition from the National Multicultural Institute. And this starts out referring to what we know as the protected classes. And you, as legislators, know what those are, race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, gender, disability status. But then, we go into things that are a little bit different, such as different socioeconomic status, different cultural status, different learning styles, different physical abilities, a diverse group, community, or organization in which a variety of these individuals can exist. So equity, another term we're hearing a lot about these days. Actually, not a surprise that DEI it's been in the news quite a bit, especially over the last couple of days. There have been some attacks on the issue of DEI, particularly the equity piece. A couple of very large organizations have taken the E out of DEI and have what they call DI initiatives. which I think is a little bit interesting, like why keep 2 out of the 3, but that is what they have done. But, I want to talk about equity because it is an important concept, and I think sometimes there are some misperceptions about that. So equity is a guarantee of fair treatment. It's different from equality, does not mean the exact same thing. Equity recognizes that some groups have had barriers to success, to opportunities, and seeks to eliminate those barriers and level the playing field so that everybody has an equal opportunity to avail themselves of whatever is there, whether it's a job, an education, an apartment, whatever it might be. All right, next one, inclusion, great word. Creating an environment in which any individual or group feels welcome, feels appreciated, respects differences in people's styles, people's backgrounds, people's perspectives, talking about a group that is made up of diverse individuals with different thoughts and ideas. So this is a great graphic that I love. I've been using this one for a couple of years. I haven't found a better one yet. When I do, I will maybe change it up. But equality is basically everybody gets the same. We are all treated equal. So in this particular situation, we're watching a soccer game. We have 3 individuals, all of different heights, and they all get the same box in order to watch the game. And we can see tall guy on the left probably doesn't really need the box because he's way above it. Little guy gets his box, but he still can't see because, like me, he's not tall enough to see over the tallest. So equality didn't really work for little guy by being treated the same. So equity, everyone gets the support they need. So what does that mean? Maybe tall guy gives up his box to little guy. Tall guy didn't really need the box. He's just fine without it. The middle person, the woman, she's okay either way. She's fine with the 1 box. Little guy, now he can see with the 2. Justice is eliminating the barrier in the first place. Equity is trying to overcome the barrier. Justice, eliminating it. So in this situation, we have a chain link fence rather than a wooden fence. Everybody can see through it without any assistance, and we're all on the same playing field. Come on in. Room up in the front.
No one likes to sit in the front.
Oh, yeah. It's like school. Why don't you go to the next slide?
Okay, what's going on out there? There's so much going on right now. And hate has no home here. And that's something where we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be accepted and belonging in an organization or anywhere, actually, regardless of who they are, what their background is. And it, we have here, it's a Black Lives Matter example, but it really relates to everything. What's going on in the workplace? We have, harassment, the Me Too, Black Lives Matter, lack of civility, political disagreements, the war going on, retaliation complaints continue to rise, concerns about the economic stability and personal rights, and mental health and well-being. Mental health and well-being is actually really prevalent right now in the workplace. And one of the things that, growing up, I remember being told, keep your personal life outside, keep your baggage at the door and come in and go to work. Some of you are nodding your head, right? Now, I think there's a lot of work-life integration because whether there's some people that are working from home, there are things that happen at home that affect the workplace, that affect home. So it's more integration and people are talking about it more. And so I think that that's really important and a big piece of the workplace now. There are a lot of taboo topics that are in the workplace, but as legislators, you talk about them on a regular basis. Abortion, education, guns, immigration, religion, climate control, all of these topics, and these are just an example, but you talk about them on a regular basis in your roles. And how do you navigate those topics knowing that some people feel very strongly versus, different beliefs, different thought processes, and how do you navigate that when you yourself might feel really strongly about something like that, and how to remain professional and respectful of somebody else's beliefs and thought processes as well. So what is discrimination? Charlotte talked earlier about the protected classes. I'm sure you've heard this before, so I'm not going to read every one of them, but there are protected classes. And when I first started in HR, there were only a few. But as things change in the world, there's additional topics that are more important to make sure that there are people that are protected and being treated fairly along the way. So discrimination in the workplace, and I know we say employment, but for employment for purposes, it's everybody that's in this building, right? So employment decisions based on membership in a protected class, it's really making sure that the people that are hired because they're the best individuals for the job, or voted in because they're the most qualified individual for the position, not based on their race, or any of the protected classes. Employment decisions based on stereotypes or assumptions about a protected class, and then denying employment opportunities to a person because of marriage or association with someone in a protected class. So what that means is the example that we've been talking about is, let's say you have somebody who volunteered that they are the parent of a child with a disability, and they're not elected or they're not hired because, if they have a child with a disability, they're not going to be able to come to work on time. They're going to be out a lot because they're at doctor's appointments, and you don't really know their circumstance. So you're making a decision not to elect them or not to hire them because of the association with someone in a protected class. So that's the example that we've been using on that.
Yeah, so the individual is not disabled, but the child is disabled. So they get that protection by virtue of the decision made based on that association or family relationship. So here's our first hypothetical. Tim and Miguel are the hiring managers looking to fill a number of open positions in the human resources and security departments. In meeting with the organization's recruiters, the issue of department demographics comes up. Tim mentions that they have had trouble recruiting new workers, especially younger workers, and he's concerned that succession planning efforts will be undermined without an influx of new people with new ideas. Anybody see a problem with that? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, 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 exactly. When you're in a situation saying we want only younger people, we don't want to look at older people, we want this, we want that. For sure, if you're picking one group to the exclusion of all else, that would be a form of discrimination. So what about if the conversation were around the organization's DEI strategy and the need to hire more Latinx workers to increase diversity? Problem? Some of you are kind of going, well, it sounds like a good motivation to want to increase diversity. But if we're saying, yeah. Right. Or, yeah. I mean, if you were saying we're only looking for, boom, whatever it may be, women, Latinx, Muslims, whatever. Pick a category. We're gonna hire them, but not others. That would be a problem. Go right ahead.
Well, of course you can easily get around it, but the thing we want people to do is say that we're junkies.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you do about if you look around the department and everybody's within a few years of retiring?
Right.
So that we're not going to last very long.
Yep.
We don't have, we have more years to work with.
Right. Which is, and I think that things like succession planning, I mean, those are very real concerns and issues for the longevity of an organization. You need new leaders, right? As people leave, retire, whatever they might do. So you might want to talk about expanding your pool of applicants in some way. Maybe we ought to recruit in different places. Maybe we ought to go to colleges to recruit. Maybe we ought to have an internship program or an apprenticeship program so that we can encourage younger people to apply for these jobs, or people that are new to the workforce. They may be older, but they're just graduating college. So yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have those conversations. I think the key is not to say we're going to elevate one group or, tip the scale in their favor to the detriment of another group. But all of these are important considerations. It's sort of how you handle it. That make sense?
I think to a certain extent, but to a certain extent, you should have to
That's a good point. It's a good point. I think that the issue is, a lot of it is not, let's not just hire more people that are just like us. And I think that, organizations fall into that a lot. The familiarity and comfort with, we've hired, 30 people that look like Joe, and Joe's been doing a great job. So, let's keep hiring all the Joes and not the Josephines or the Jose's or whoever else it might be. And I do think it's a different mindset. Somebody else had, yeah.
Maybe you're gonna get to this, but how then are you supposed to build a diverse team, which everybody thinks is a worthy goal, if you can't be intentional with it?
I'm not saying you can't be intentional about it. I think the real issue here is the exclusion of one, or saying, even saying we're going to tip the scales. Now, because that would be discrimination. So, or reverse discrimination, or whatever you want to call it. But I think if you're in a situation where you have multiple candidates, and you have two candidates that have similar qualifications, then, you can increase the diversity in your workplace by saying, this person's qualified, this one's diverse, we'll pick this one. But we're not saying only this group need apply.
And the reason that you're not selecting them is because they're of a certain class or a certain diverse group that you wanted to include in your company.
The goal is to get from wood and fence to change.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
You had your hand up. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead. It feels like there's no perfect answer here, because if you have 20 guys who look like Joe, and you say, all right, we want diversity, you are discriminating against the next candidate who happens to look like Joe.
Right.
And, I'd like to ask you what I've done in hiring. I'm interested in your professional view on this matter.
Okay.
Is to say that there is professional value to our organization to having people with different viewpoints.
Sure.
And, therefore, that's going to be one of, we look at experience and education, and, references, and
Everything. Yep.
they have an interesting, a life experience that will bring something new to our conversation.
Sure. I think that is okay. Even under the, Supreme Court decision on affirmative action, which removed the affirmative action from, from the college environment, where, you can take into account life experiences. It requires you to dig deeper. It requires you to do a little bit more work in learning what the background is. But yeah, I mean, you do want, and, very often race or gender or religion is not the only determinative factor of different experiences. So yeah, you take the package, but I think, what you talked about sounds like a great way to do it. Yes.
Will this situation be different if it was a number of positions that are a single position? So if the target a single position to fill out the ladder agency there.
Yeah, I don't think it is different. I think it's the same, unless you're in a situation where you are, an affirmative action, an organization that's required to have an affirmative action plan, and you need to try and meet numbers or standards or follow a plan which requires that. No, if it's, we need to hire one young person for this role. Nobody over the age of 40 need apply to this position, or one Latinx worker, to the exclusion of everybody else. I think it's the same issue, whether you're filling one role or multiple roles. Yeah. Hello. All right, next slide. So I think one of the most important topics when we talk about, creating a comfortable workplace or a inclusive or welcoming workplace is the issue of building trust. Because very often people will be skeptical, for example, around things like, what's your motivation behind that? Why are you doing this? So I think people have to feel comfortable having the conversations. And that's where we talk about creating psychological safety, which means a place where people can be assured of confidentiality if that's something that's important to them, or be assured that they can bring up their ideas. And you said be difficult. I'm saying just bringing up a topic or an issue or asking a question without being shot down or without, feeling like there's retribution against you. People should be, if you're truthfully want to have people with diverse ideas, with diverse backgrounds, then you want to hear all their perspectives. And it needs to be a safe place for them to share those perspectives and be respected, even if you don't agree with them. Don't have to agree, but just be respectful. Embracing different voices. And I think the most important component is learning from our differences. And, what better organization than a legislature to try to learn from one another and from differences. It's a small state, but there are still different perspectives and, different needs in different communities. So learning from one another could be very, very helpful in making you do your job better. Next. So I think this is sort of reiterating an obvious point that we've talked about, having more thoughtful conversations. And, like I said, we mentioned in the beginning that this is the beginning, DE and I, where do we begin? We want you to have more conversations as a group around how we make the workplace more welcoming, more respectful. Involve everybody in the process. I use the term employees, but it's certainly not limited to staff. It's everyone. And this is one in which we can have a little bit of a discussion around creating a workplace in which all employees feel welcome, can be their authentic selves, regardless of whatever the category may be: race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation. And when I say that, I don't mean their most authentic, unfiltered self who will say anything or do anything, but their authentic self, meaning, my persona, which is, however I identify, female attorney. I'm not going to say which party, but I certainly identify with the party, whatever it may be. What's my sexual orientation? I shouldn't have to feel uncomfortable sharing that. I shouldn't feel uncomfortable talking about my family because other people that I work with will disapprove of that lifestyle. It's being your authentic self and not having to hide part of yourself from the people you work with. And, Sam talked about mental health and wellness. And one of the issues with workplace mental health and wellness is that there are higher incidents of mental health issues and problems with people who don't feel as though they can be their authentic selves at work. It's higher levels of stress, anxiety. What if somebody finds out that I have this kind of life or that I follow this religion? People should be able to be themselves and feel comfortable. Next.
But I didn't mean to offend you. So there's lots of times where there's intent versus impact. So intent is what a person is meant to do, and an impact is how does that make the receiver feel. I did a similar training a couple days ago at a client, and somebody said, well, what happens if I ask them if it's okay? And I said, I see the look on your face. And I said, this, because you're thinking that you have to ask permission, it probably means it's not okay. So don't say it. Don't joke about it. Don't write it down, right? So you have to be thoughtful of how are you receiving that information? What are you saying and how are you receiving it? And it's not just watching, saying it, but it's also looking at the body language, because somebody might, if they are in an uncomfortable situation, they might laugh or they might make a comment back because they want to fit in or because they don't feel comfortable and they don't know how to respond to a situation like that. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the whole picture and not, it's thinking before you speak, and also typing, right? You have all of it's not just the verbal piece of it. There's some pretty bold people behind the email, right? It's easier because you don't see the person's face and you can just fire off an email or fire off a text. And I think that is even being more sensitive because you can't see the person typing it. So you don't know what they're actually thinking or feeling, and nor do you know the person receiving it. And Charlotte has talked about this in a couple other sessions have you heard, well, you shouldn't feel that way. How do you know how I should feel? They're my feelings. Don't tell me how I should feel, or don't say I shouldn't feel that way or a certain way or have feelings at all, because they're my feelings and
I
it's
was just
my
kidding.
interpretation. Yeah, I was just kidding. I didn't mean it, whatever. But the thing with this is you don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to come to work today and I'm going to be a pain in the butt to Charla, right? I don't like her, so I'm going to intimidate her, or I'm going to discriminate her, or I'm just going to be plain mean to her. That's not the intent. And a lot of times people don't realize what they're saying or what they're doing because people get comfortable, or they might not just think it, they just might say something or do something and not really think it through. So it's really making you aware and being more sensitive to how the person receiving the information is taking that information.
Yeah, and I think that Sam makes a good point about body language when, we talk about whether touching is appropriate or whether you're in somebody's space. And I often use family members in these trainings as examples. But my daughter, I mean, we're like kind of a big ethnic family and we feed everybody and we're always hugging and kissing. And my daughter does not like to be hugged from when she was a baby. We don't know where it came from or why she's so different from the rest of us, but she doesn't like it. And I'll say, Christine, can I have a hug? And she'll go. Or sometimes when I touch her, like she'll do this. Yeah, right. When somebody touches you on the shoulder, we call her the porcupine. It's like, nope, stay away. So we say, can I have a hug? Like we always ask permission and we'll be mindful of it, because even her husband says, yeah, when I was sick, she snuggled with me. Like that was like a big deal. Like she has, but it's how she reacts to it. So you can sometimes tell if you think you're being funny, but then somebody is like looking at the floor and going, yeah. You can read into it and be mindful of the signals people are sending you.
Something that came up in another session that when Charlotte was talking just popped into my head. And remember, this is session 4, so we're, we forget what we've said in which session. But someone had said, well, what happens if I want to be educated? Can I ask? So I had said, well, if earlier I said, well, if you're thinking about saying something, you have to ask permission to say it. Probably don't say it. But if you're asking because you're curious about a background or their diversity of whatever it might be, that's a different question. And how you're presenting the question is more you're curious and you'd like to learn and be educated, as opposed to just making a comment or what have you. Like a couple months ago, I was asked to do an investigation, and it was related to how a transgender was being treated in the workplace. And when I was talking to the individual, they asked me, point out, how do you have experience in having conversations with transgenders? Do you know what you should and shouldn't say? And I thought about that. I was like, I'm not really sure. So I would like to be educated, and thank you for asking, because I don't want to say something or do something that you would find offensive, and I have no idea that I've offended you. And so if people are open and having that dialogue, it helps kind of navigate the conversation so you don't inadvertently say something that could offend somebody.
Okay, this is I think an important distinction to talk about, the difference between bias and bigotry. So we all have biases. We have biases in favor of certain people, certain groups, certain things. We have biases against them. They come from very different places. They can come from your cultural background, from your education, your upbringing, your family life, like I talked about with my family hugging all the time. Some families don't hug at all. And so maybe those individuals are more sensitive to the touch. Biases can be overcome. I talked earlier about when I first became a partner in my law firm, I found that I was starting to tend to give more assignments to female associates. And And then I started to think about, well, why is that? Is it because I'm more comfortable with them, have more in common with them? I'm going to spend a lot more time with them. Do I feel a responsibility to mentor and help out younger women? And I really thought, oh boy, you better stop that. And you better really start thinking about giving assignments to the male associates who may want to do employment law cases just as much. Maybe just as great to work with, maybe have a lot to offer. And so it was something I recognized in myself, that I was sort of going one way, and I really needed to pull back and think about it every time I was giving an assignment so that I was being fair. Bigotry, on the other hand, is intolerance, glorifying your group and denigrating another group. We're better than you for whatever reason. That is a problem. That is something under which you can make some decisions which could ultimately end up causing legal action, causing harm to the organization. So you really want to be mindful of the differences of, bias that you can learn about, that you can kind of overcome and direct yourself, especially when you figure out where it's coming from, as opposed to bigotry, which is essentially what we talk about when we're talking about discrimination and prejudice. Next slide. This is just a wordle of some terminology, and I will confess that many of these terms I had to look up the first time I saw them because they were new to me. Sometimes it was many, many years ago, but I didn't know what implicit bias was when I first heard the term. I had to learn about it. So I'm gonna go through a few terms which I think are important. This may be very basic to many of you and say, yeah, I know that, I've heard that before. To others, it may be the first time you've heard some of these terms. Ally, we hear it a lot in terms of racial discrimination, but it can be brought up in many, many different contexts. An ally is a person who has not experienced whatever it is, the discrimination, oppression, whatever it may be, but rather wants to help eliminate that. So is going to stand by and be an ally, speak up in a way that supports ending that type of either oppression or discrimination. And I recently wrote an article about being a mental health ally at work, which is how do you help somebody who may be struggling with a mental health issue but isn't comfortable coming forward? How do you provide support, resources? How do you speak up on their behalf? And we've got a couple of examples that we will be discussing in the hypotheticals about how one might be an ally. Cultural competence. This talks about the ability of an individual or an organization to understand different cultures and perspectives, to be mindful of them when providing services, when having communications. One example that, actually the first time I heard about cultural competence was when I was on the board of directors of a low-income health clinic, and we had some, a significant refugee population at the time. And, many people were coming in with their children with different medical conditions. And, these are people that, never had a stove, never had a refrigerator. I mean, they are coming from, a completely different world from the one in which we have grown up. So they were using home remedies that their parents and grandparents had used to try to deal with things like, an infection or a diaper rash. And the physicians and the nurses who were trying to provide care had to come at this from the perspective of not insulting those individuals and the culture and the way that their medical issues had been dealt with from when they were very small children, but also giving them the resources that were available in Western medicine. So they had to accommodate from, with the competence to be able to talk to them about, what they were doing and how they were potentially thought they were helping their child, but saying, hey, we could give a vaccination or we could give some medication that might be more helpful to your child. Okay, next one. So implicit bias, I mentioned bias. I mean, implicit bias, unconscious bias, those terms are, sometimes used interchangeably. They are negative associations that you might have about a group, about an individual. maybe they're not, you don't know they're there necessarily. Maybe they're not intentional. They might come from, as we said, your culture, your upbringing. They can have significant effect on individuals in the workplace or in the community. And one way we learn about them and learn to overcome them is with some unconscious bias training. That is not what this is. But the first time I really was able to drill down on some of that was when I attended a great session from a really, really good trainer who could talk about, yeah, this is where, this is how the brain works. And this is where you may get that, that idea in your head that then may translate to this real world implication. It's not necessarily the stereotype of older people can't use technology or, that type of thing, but it really gets down to the essence of, how does your brain work and what biases do you have? And very often it takes a little bit of work to discover what they are. Next. All right, back to you.
Fostering a respectful workplace. And again, this is when we say workplace, we understand that it's everyone within this building, even though it's staff versus legislation. It's civility, courtesy, professionalism, respect, and making sure that even though you might not like somebody or you have different beliefs, that you're agreeing in a professional way. The saying, we're going to agree to disagree, making sure that, especially in topics that are really heated or that there's a lot of emotion involved in that, making sure that you are professional and respectful for the individual, and making sure that they feel, and Charlotte talked about this, that they feel safe in an environment where they can speak up and they can say something, even if they know that you might not agree with whatever they're saying or you don't understand it. And there are a lot of things that people might not understand about a culture or a specific diverse situation or individual, but you're respectful enough of that individual and you're professional enough to allow them to speak freely and say what they need to say, on their positive, authentic self, not the unprofessional person that is coming into work. Positive behaviors that produce feelings of respect and dignity, making sure that you're aware, again, of not just the verbal piece of it, but the body language, and avoiding conduct that is offensive and threatening. There are times when, and this happened at one of the clients that I had a couple of weeks ago, actually, where there was an individual who came forward for a racial complaint. And somebody that they work with found out that it was the individual that came forward, and they threatened that individual. That's not okay. Everybody should be able to come forward and share a concern that they have and feel that it's safe without retaliation and without feeling that they're threatened because they came forward and said something. And those are things that, a reasonable person wouldn't do, but that really bothered that person. They thought that they were doing the right thing because they thought they were protecting the company, but threatening the person is not protecting the company. It actually, expose liability concerns about that situation. So it's thinking before you speak and making sure that it's okay to come forward. It's okay to say something, and being civil and respectful to those individuals, even if you don't understand the situation or the perspective of where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think that the whole issue of respect and civility, a lot of it comes into very, very simple things like manners, please and thank you. I have done many investigations where somebody has said something like, he doesn't like me. I was like, well, how do you know he doesn't like you? Well, he never says good morning, and he doesn't look me in the eye. And, first, then the next question is, well, is that only you he doesn't say good morning to, or is he just not somebody who is a friendly person? And in that particular situation, it wasn't a discrimination issue, but it was somebody who really was not particularly civil or respectful in the workplace, didn't really show appreciation to individuals who did projects for him, work for him, didn't say things like good morning, thank you, hello, how you doing today? He just was somebody that needed some people person training, but this individual in their mind was taking it personally and thinking it was about them because that's what we naturally do, right? When somebody treats us negatively, we start to fill in the blanks in our head and, you know, he doesn't like me, he's going to fire me. So this was a situation where the person needed some coaching about respectful behavior and civility. But very often they'll say uncivil behavior in the workplace is a precursor to discrimination and harassment because it can move from one to the other. So Sam has a stutter. This is another hypothetical, but not really. At management meetings, when Sam reports to the group about the status of his projects, Walter will interrupt him and say things like, "We cannot understand you," or he'll restate what Sam said. What you're really trying to say is, Sam has never said anything and others in the management meetings have said nothing. Is there anything wrong with this? Why do we think we're sitting in that meeting observing this? Problem?
That's terrible. Yeah.
Yeah. It's rude, it's disrespectful, it's uncivil.
Well, and condescending and discriminatory and all. That can go on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, it undermines, you know, it's undermining the authority of that person.
Yeah.
Credibility of their work performance.
Yeah. It's making it, yeah, very.
It'll make the person look bad at their job.
How about particular, like, how would you handle it if you were the manager in this meeting or a coworker? Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, this is a you know, a great example of, you know, potentially for allyship where somebody could say, "Hey, would you let Sam finish? You're being rude, Walter." I mean, you don't have to embarrass Walter. You may be saying you're rude would be embarrassing him, but, you know, you may want to gently, if this is the first time he's done this, say, "Hey, Walter, let him finish. He's trying to get through his report." If it's repeated behavior, you know, you may want to be more forceful, but yeah, that's a perfect situation for allyship. What if Sam or Samantha and Walter was telling her to speak more loudly so everybody could hear and kept restating her points? What Samantha really means is, oh,
They half and half. These are points that are acceptable, but asking somebody to speak up so everyone can hear.
if you really can't hear them. Yeah, yeah. I think that's legitimate. I think, yeah, restating her points, dismissing her ideas, interrupting her, all of that would be definitely rude and uncivil. Uh-huh. Yeah. That's a great question. Right. And it, you know, some of that depends. So are presentation skills an important part of their job? Now, in some jobs, they're essential, right? You know, 'cause they're absolutely essential. You can't do in writing what you are going to do verbally, you know. So yes, and in those situations, if somebody, you know, has everything but maybe is struggling a little bit, like this situation, that's not give me 1 second. That's not the major part of his job doing presentations, but he has to report out at meetings. So, you know, we talk about that. Is there something that can solve that problem? Coaching, training on public speaking, that may or may not help with a stutter stitch situation, but someone who's just not able to articulate, you know, maybe that's some coaching or some training, and that might be 1 or 2 sessions that might be very helpful. You know, maybe a mentor helps them to practice. You know, like, you know, in the old days, we used to practice making your opening argument in front of me. You know, those kinds of things where a mentor can help, an ally can help in that situation. Maybe it's not necessary they present, so you do a workaround. So it really just depends on what's the level in which it's a problem? How big a problem is it? How important a part of their job is it? And can you provide some resources and help for them to improve?
The biggest thing is having a conversation with the person, right?
Oh,
Pulling,
sure,
not in
yeah.
front of people, right? Pulling them aside and talking it out with them to see what do they feel comfortable with? What do they have challenges with, and what you're observing, and how can you work together to get them to either where they want to be or where you need them to be? And if it's not possible, what accommodations can be made for them to be successful, but maybe not public speak, or, you have a plan,
Walter
something-
may hate presenting and may not want to do it and would be perfectly happy if you said, Walter, you can give your report in writing. Or he may say, I need practice, so I want to do it. You're looking skeptical. Sure. Right, yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, it doesn't even have to be a disability or something, right? I'll give you an example that I lived through. So I was the only and youngest female executive in an organization, and the rest of the executives were white men. And the CEO, we were looking at doing we were recruiting a high level position, and they kept, the CEO kept going to the CFO for information. And I would start talking and they would just run right over me. And finally, I had a conversation with the CEO, and I said, do you go to the CEO, to the CFO for HR issues, or do you come to me for finance issues? And they said, no. And I said, then why are you doing that? You need to come to me because I am your subject matter expert, and I might be quiet, but they might be louder, but louder doesn't make them right. It makes them louder. And so it's a small thing, but you have to be able to have that conversation, because he wasn't aware of what he was doing, but it was driving me. It was really irritating me. Right. So I almost said drive me crazy. And that's something we're going to talk about later. So that's a perfect real life example right there. But it was bothering me, and it was irritating me. So I felt I needed to speak up to make him more aware of the situation. So I think she had a
Yeah,
question
her and then
first.
you. Excuse- Oh, yes.
I think that, when you hire somebody, it might be a good idea to have a conversation with them in advance. But, person is, some people have to make you feel they're on the spot and help them afterwards, but what kind of
For sure, during the hiring process, you want to ask people if they need accommodation. Are you qualified to do the job during the process when they advance and you're about to make them an offer? Do you need accommodations? Or after you've made an offer, do you need accommodations? Appropriate to have that conversation, certainly around any kind of disability accommodation very early on in the process. But that's going to be a very general, are you qualified to do this job with or without accommodations? It's when you sort of start to see that there might be an issue that maybe that interactive process around disability occurs. Maybe Walter never presented before and or he got promoted but you're right. I mean, he's got a job, and how essential is the ability to present at his job? But yeah, I mean, I do encourage people to have those conversations early on.
I was uncomfortable with the conversation around Sam when it kept revolving around Sam has something wrong with them that needs fixing. So
Yep.
when it turned to the accommodation issue, which I agree should be managed early on, and I think the employer's responsibility to provide reasonable accommodations.
Yep.
I'm glad that conversation turned to, how can we fix Sam? What can we do to make the workplace better for them?
Yeah, I think what this gentleman was raising was not necessarily Sam with the stutter, but somebody who just isn't very good at presenting or making a point. I'll sort of wrap up that thought because I think you have it captured that one way to handle this is sort of offline with Sam to have the conversation and say, hey, I noticed what Walter was doing, interrupting you. And, how do you feel about that? Is there something that we can do to help? And if Walter says something like, I don't want to make those presentations, maybe that's an appropriate way to accommodate him by letting him present in writing. But if Walter says, hey, this is part of my job and I want to make presentations, then people need to deal with that because this isn't like a public facing, he's not doing a presentation in front of 200 people. He's not going to court. He is with his coworkers around a table. And if he doesn't want an accommodation, you can't force one on him. And he should be able to present, and we're going to have some patience and allow him to present. And I think that's the way any accommodation works. If somebody requests an accommodation for disability, for religious purposes, for whatever it is, you have that conversation, decide whether there's a reasonable accommodation you can provide. But if they don't want it, you can't force it on them. So it's not we don't even know if Sam has a disability. Every speech impediment is not necessarily a disability. So we're not, we have to treat it as though if he wants to do his job, we're going to allow him to do his job, and we're not going to have somebody being rude and interrupting him in that situation. Okay. Go ahead.
I think we've talked about the majority of these.
Yeah.
I think being mindful of addressing problem behaviors in others, right? I think, what happens when you ignore a problem behavior? It doesn't go away, right? Lots of times it just gets worse. So it's addressing the problem behavior. So in that last example, if Walter was being disrespectful to Sam, sitting down and having a conversation with Walter, right? Because that would be the appropriate thing to do. And making sure that, this see something, hear something, say something. If you're seeing it, observing it, and hearing it, say something. Because if you don't, and you observe it or hear it, and you don't say anything, what is the perception? That you agree or that you condone what's happening. And it's harder to do that, right? It's harder to step in and say something, but helping people and making sure that that behavior is being addressed in an appropriate way is helpful. And we're kind of flipping through this slide because we've already talked about this and we have a couple other topics and we want to get you guys out on time. So.
Yeah, I think we can jump over this one. Important, is this you? Sorry.
Yeah, but go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going through this really quickly because I know what we're getting to is avoid assumptions of what people of different backgrounds can or like to do. One example I like to use there is, a young woman who's just had a couple of children applies for a position. Hiring managers decide, well, we're not going to give her that job because she has 2 young kids, so she's probably not going to want to travel. And there's a lot of travel involved in this particular job. Like, not appropriate to assume that she's not going to want to travel. Maybe she's got a live-in nanny. Maybe her husband is a stay-at-home dad. Who knows what her situation is? And you want to be able to give people the opportunity if they deserve that opportunity. Don't give older people jobs in technology because they're going to be too slow. Again, assumptions about what people can do. So avoid that. Avoid thinking of an individual as diverse. It's a diverse workforce, it's a diverse community, it's a diverse whatever. An individual may represent a particular group, but it's not a diverse individual. We've heard terminology recently to say they're a DEI hire, very negative connotation to that somehow they got a leg up and didn't really deserve the job, but because they were a member of the protected class, they got this position. So we're a DEI hire, not as good as the others. A real hot button, topic. And of course, I think that's the rest of this is repetitive of what we'd already talked about. So There we go. We could talk about microaggressions. I like to refer to microaggressions as death by 1,000 cuts. It's usually something that can be fairly minor in isolation, might be unconscious, might be off the cuff, maybe no intention at all in offending. But if it denigrates a particular group or individual and it's heard more than once, even if it's slight, it can add up and create, a real problem and potentially result in a claim of discrimination or somebody being really unhappy and uncomfortable and feel unwelcome in the workplace. Go ahead, next slide. So SHRM, the Society for Human Resources, it's the largest trade association for human resource professionals globally. They did a survey in 2019, found that 26% of adults had said they had had experienced a microaggression at work. 36%, and not just at work, never mind in the community, 36% said they'd witnessed microaggressions at work, and another 22% were unsure, which means that maybe people do not really understand what a microaggression can be. It is not an aggression, that's different. A microaggression, like I said, is something small. So about a month ago, I was doing training for a board of directors of an organization specific to microaggressions. So I found this article that was either in Harvard Business Review or Forbes, which said the top 10 microaggressions to avoid at work. And I decided that I would use this because that particular group of people had used at least 5 of them towards the senior management staff of the organization. So we were like, okay, we're gonna cover some. Now, some of these can be a little bit, they've engendered some conversation in some of these sessions, but this is directly from that article. Saying a Black person is articulate or well-spoken. I mean, we could probably remember when Barack Obama was running for president, it was, oh, he's so articulate. He's such a good speaker. Like this was something amazing that he could possibly be so articulate. Claiming to be colorblind or saying they don't see black or white. Why could that be a microaggression? Because people aren't really going to believe you when you say that. I mean, we all see gender, we all see color, we all see ethnicity. It's part of who a person is. If you were saying, you don't discriminate on the basis of race, that's one thing. I don't know why you'd have to go out of your way to say it, but claiming not to see it is, I think, disingenuous. Asking Black men and women if they went to college on an athletic scholarship, assuming that that's how you get to college. Stating we need younger people for one reason or another. We need younger people to the exclusion of older people. Like, yeah, we have too many older people around here. If you're one of the older people and you keep hearing that, it's like, wait, they want to get rid of me. Asking where someone is originally from, especially if they have features of a particular racial or ethnic group. Where are you from? New York. No, where are you really from? Where do your people come from? That could be a problem. Now, that's a little different from, oh, your grandmother's from Italy. I'm going to Italy. Where is she from? And what's the best place to have dinner? That's a different kind of conversation. But, making it sound as though you're trying to drill down into what someone's ethnic background is can be a problem. Next. Stating a woman is too emotional to be a leader. What does that mean? Have we all heard that one before? Many of us heard that one before. I know I've heard it. Yeah, if you're going to use what I call the trigger words, and having moved to Northern New England in 1984, just graduated from law school, I was certainly not. There were not many other women like me in my community, so there are certain words that I still, 40 years later, go when I hear them. And emotional is one of them. Commitment is another one. She's really not committed to her job. What does that mean? She's not committed because she picks up her kids from daycare, or she comes in later, or she has to leave for a doctor's appointment. If you are going to criticize someone based on something that's kind of subjective, like emotional or not committed, you want to make sure that you have examples and say, well, how does she lack commitment? She doesn't work as many hours. She doesn't finish her projects on time. What is it? And I think that's very different bringing to the attention of someone deficiencies in their job performance as opposed to labeling them as emotional. Asking a woman if you can touch her hair, or a pregnant woman if you could touch her belly. Using terminology which brings in mental health, as Sam referred to earlier. He looks like he could go postal any day now. The weather is bipolar. If you are saying that in front of somebody who maybe is struggling with a mental health issue, has a family member who just committed suicide, or died by suicide, then that can be a problem. Just bringing in mental health as a criticism of something or someone. Using outdated terminology, which might have racial undertones to some, calling a spade a spade. Dismissing complaints as misunderstandings. Oh, you didn't really understand what he was trying to say. Yeah, he was just kidding. He didn't mean to offend you. That's just Joe. That's the way he normally acts. A few others that were not from that article, but which I have seen or had to address. Assuming a Latino coworker is an immigrant, complimenting their English speaking. Asking only women or younger staff to order lunch, take notes. I think Sam referred to that one as something she's experienced. Accusing women or people of color of being too angry or aggressive when the same behavior is viewed positively in men. Certainly have experienced that myself as a female attorney. Telling women they should smile more. You're unapproachable. You have a look on you're too serious all the time. People don't think you want to have a good time. People don't want to come chat with you. If you smiled more, you'd look much more approachable, be much prettier. Next slide. All right, Leroy and Mike are the only two African-American employees in the department. Their manager consistently calls them both Leroy. They laugh it off and joke about it at first, but after a couple of weeks, they get frustrated and go to the department director to complain. Anything wrong here? What do you think about that? Yes, something's wrong. Yes. Yeah. Disrespect, maybe discrimination, can't bother to learn their names. Now, if you mix them up the first time you see them, that might be a oops, sorry. Most people will give you grace if you make a misstep once. We've talked about that with, the use of pronouns. It's something that, many people are still getting used to. And if you mistakenly call somebody by pronouns other than the ones that they have identified that they wish to be called by, if you make a mistake, they're usually going to say, I apologize, I made a mistake. They're usually going to be okay with that. Most people will give you grace, but if it continues on and on, and I gave the example when I joined my law firm, there were a couple of women that had been there probably 10 years longer than I had. They were the first two female partners in the firm. There's a senior partner in the firm consistently referred to them as the blonde on the first floor and the blonde on the second floor. Didn't look anything alike, not even closely. One was in real estate, one was in litigation. Literally, there is no way you could mix these two women up. And, that became kind of a joke and became urban legend when a lot of people started referring to them as the blonde on the first floor and the blonde on the second floor. Probably years later, 30 years later, they joked about it, but, I bet at the time, probably didn't go over that well. You can't bother to learn my name. There's only two of us. How are you mixing us up? So definitely a form of a microaggression and something that should be addressed. So department director should get that one too. Human resources. Of course. Yep. We are on the last two slides. Okay, why don't we jump to the next slide? Because I just want to talk about your policies and where do you go. You need to know, and you also need to be able to tell people where to go. The House has a policy on the prevention of discrimination, governs the conduct of all House members and all staff, regardless of who they're staffed to. If a conduct of a House member is at issue, contact a member of the House panel for the prevention of discrimination. If it's a staff member, you want to go to the Legislative Office of Human Resources. Next slide. Senate has no policy, but discrimination is considered conduct unbecoming a senator, so you would go to the Senate Ethics Panel or the Secretary of the Senate with a complaint. You will get these slides and you will have these available to you. So thank you very much. If you have questions and can stay behind, feel free. Otherwise, off to where you need to go. Thank
Thank you.
Been a pleasure.